Hi everyone, welcome. I am Karen Bass and together with Gustavo Martinez we'll tell you about the news or reporting for GeneXus 18. We know that decision making in companies is fundamental and our system creates great volumes of data that have to be processed, organized, and cleaned. And that is why in GeneXus we give you two tools for that. First, we have the query object that allows you to have consults in the database, give you information about new indexes and indicators, and present them in the most convenient way in a chart, in a graph, or a map. Then we have the dashboard object that allows us to organize certain queries that are connected to each other and show them in the same graphic representation. Also, the dashboard filters allow us to manage all the information. With each GeneXus version, we continue fostering these objects and improving them. Now, let us talk about different points that we will be discussing today. We will talk about the end user improvements, and then we will talk about the improvements for GeneXus developers. We will talk about modeling. We will also talk about the edition and build processes, and we will talk about the new available documentation. Now, let's talk about end users first. We have the new design systems provided by GeneXus 18. This is the default for the version, and the objective of Unanimo is to give consistency. Both the queries and the dashboard will also have this design. This also includes aid for non-experienced users. On the one hand, in the pivot table, we have a section of drop filter here. We included an information icon where if you scroll with your mouse over it, you can have information. And also if you go through the titles of the pivot table, you can see an icon where you can see that there are more configurable options. We also have two predefined modes, the light and the dark for the dashboard, so you can see all the components as you want. These changes also has an impact on the dashboards because the dashboard filters look exactly the same in terms of the design as the rest of the app. You can also customize the Unanimo design so that when you change the main color of Unanimo, you will adapt the queries in the dashboard based on your needs.
Thank you so much, Karen. Now we are going to talk a bit about the new scenarios that we will be solving with GeneXus 18. So let's assume that we have an image like the one we have on the screen right now, which shows the COVID-19 daily cases in Uruguay during the last wave of the Omicron strain that happened in early 2022. So as you can see, there is a lot of variability in the data and a lot of noise, and it would be really nice to have a way in which you can automatically eliminate all that noise so that you can say the underlying trends. And this is something that you can do, soften or smooth the curve using something that you call mobile averages. So instead of plotting the value for each day, what you're doing is, for instance, what is the average for the last 7 days, or you can even use the a central average type that will take data both looking forward and looking back. So with a query object, you can do it, and you just need to configure some properties. So for instance, you have the show values as property, which can be set in rolling average, and that is going to show that it's mobile. And then with the average type property, you can indicate the kind of average that you want to have. So you have different options. You have central averages or not. You have averages with or without weight, accumulated averages or not. So you can also use the number of terms property to indicate how many elements will be participating in that average. Another very used method in data analysis is what we call partial sums. So this is shown for each point. What is the cumulative number up to that value? In that screen, you have the same plot with the accumulated values and the original values using two vertical axes due to the big differences in magnitude if you compare both indicators. So this is something that you can do with a query object just by configuring the show values as property as running total. And you also have the show as percentage property. That property allows you to see these partial numbers as percentages of a maximum value reached. Sometimes you're not totally interested in the values in themselves, but in the difference. So for example, what was the increase or the decrease of a value? And this is compared to a fixed value, such as, for instance, the previous value or the initial value in the series. This is also done with the show values as property, setting it at difference. And with the from property, you can indicate whether you're referring to the previous value or the initial value of the series. You can also indicate by using the show as percentage property whether you want to see these differences in percentages or not. After GeneXus 18, the different elements in the query may not have a description. So you can get an interface like the one you see here on the screen where you have 4 different queries shown as cards where the indicators don't have a description but they only show a value because the title is already telling you outside, what it is. And this also applies to graphs. So for some reason you may just choose not to show anything on the x-axis or the y-axis because what you're showing in that graph is clear because of context. Something that's also new is the inclusion of maps in the GeneXus Live of 2021. Karen was telling you in a video what the options are for maps. So she told us that there are 2 kinds of maps. You have bubble maps, where the value of the indicator is given by the size of the bubble, and then choropleth maps, where the indicator is represented by varying the color or the intensity of the color. So what's new about this is that we have a full implementation for geopoint data. These are geographic coordinates such as longitude and latitude in such a way that if you have a bubble map, those bubbles will be located exactly in the coordinates that you indicated. And if you have a choropleth map, then you're gonna add up all the points that you have within a territory. They will be aggregated using the aggregation function for that indicator. That could be a sum, average, count, etc. And you get one value that is what is represented in the color of that territory. Most indicators with which we usually work may usually be aggregated by a number of dimensions, and that is why pivot tables will automatically display totals and subtotals when you're drawing. But this doesn't really account for 100% of cases. If you have a typical example is when you're showing, for example, amounts with different currencies. So in this case, amounts cannot be added because they are different currencies, and that's why you have properties like total for rows and total for columns that will give you the possibility to tell the pivot table not to add up these indicators in the same way that you could do that in previous versions for subtotals. After GeneXus 18, the title property of query view applies to all the different kinds of outputs. So now you can incorporate titles to your tables and pivot tables in the same way that you did that with graphs and with maps. So we completed the map implementation, which means that now you may not only build maps using ISO 3166 codes, geographic coordinates or choropleth or bubble maps, but you can make them interactive. Which means that you can program in a GeneXus event that when you click on a territory, for instance, you will have some action happening. For example, showing data about that territory or having a more detailed query about that territory. So now let's talk a bit about what's new in terms of the improvements in everyday development for GeneXus users. It's very common that when we are working with dashboards, we may need for some reason or another to open one of the queries that we are inserting and to make some modifications to it. Before you needed to do this, going to the objects sector, find that query by name and then open it and edit it. Now this is much more straightforward because you have the open command that is in the context menu of the dashboard editor, which means that you only need to right click on the query and it takes you directly to the editing option. Also in the contextual menu you have other commands like copy, cut, paste, delete, which used to be in the addition sub menu. So this means that now in the dashboard you can do this much more productively than before. Those that work with large knowledge bases know that the time to build can take a while. Time is a precious time, and that's what we need to maximize it. And along these lines, we have decided to modularize reporting objects, which is a number of SDTs and domains that before were incorporated to the KB as common objects, and therefore it was necessary to specify them and to generate them as if they were any other objects in the KB. Now, because they're part of a module, these objects are distributed in a compiled fashion, which means that it's time saving. Also thinking about the build time and also the space that you require for deployment, we decided not to distribute all the maps for all countries with the query viewer, but now we're including only the most commonly used countries by our clients. And if you have any country, if there is any country that is not in that list, you just need to reach a repository, a GitHub repository that we have made available, download the map from there, and just copy it with the other maps to start using as if it were one of the maps that we normally distribute. Now let's talk a bit about documentation and what's new with that. Reporting Showcase is a KB that shows us in what way we can do different kinds of queries in the dashboard and how to show that in different kinds of outputs. For example, graphs, charts, tables, pivot tables, and so on. This KB is available to be downloaded to a GX server, or you can just make an online query if you want. This is all we wanted to tell you today, and thanks a lot.